Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, we are now in final week 14th. I suppose you'll be a high workload to be responsive with final exam. So now we are also in the exam week. So, how much been entangled with your subject and class discussions and a review of textbooks. And we also now undergo the Olympic World Cup, a most internationally renowned games, you know. So I've enjoyed the last game. A Korean team has played much well. About our prior expectations, so we actually become more prospective about advancement. Group 6. What is it? We well expect it could produce more encouraging outcome for the Korean public. Was actually Red Devil now perhaps in presence in Brazilian stadium. Others. So we now do our work in various places. Now make presence to deliver the last lecture, 2-hour session. So that is also one interesting example we consider. So you may be fascinated with the scene that the soccer players throw to scores, or might be interesting about kind of a baseball games, the excitement and our pleasure about our leisure time. The behind force about that amenities and privileges for the large scope of citizens may be skimmed by for example, international organization. The World Cup is now challenged by some groups in Brazil, perhaps, and the policy point of contention, or dissidence about some values, ideas, mobilized by a policy makers or others might be encountered in some cases that would perhaps in some side story we may experience, for example, in TV news or others. So there is always the kind of a dissidence or disagreement about a specific public policy. How to produce any conducive or on behalf of the leadership or others, and any harmonization for the stakeholders, citizens, or viewers. One of you might argue if the international organization of that kind has some characteristics to support the kind of a dynamics of a international capitalism, so may be collaborative in the same direction to sustain the structural orders. Often the affluent society may, in their argument, they do what they hallucinate the public into any disinterpretation about the true motive or engines to develop the exposure in reality orders. For example, that kind of a lens in intellectual strand might be applied in some cases to the national context. For example, you see what the domestic violence about a public gas, what a propaganda launched by the Department of Justice. How do you see the violence? Or in some cases, we call recidivism, kind of recidivism between a spousal abuses, about a spousal abuses, for example. The kind of violence might be one important element we now see in the humanity, or called and might be tamed in collaboration with government and enterprises. They need the labor force to be responsible with the needs. And in other aspect, we also seriously committed to the unemployment problem, the dual size of flips in one coin. Nonetheless, we still would be integral to respond with the kind of a recidivism. You might be led to one important research article about a science-based decision. So how to reduce repeated crimes about this issue. And the criminals now in probationary status or under investigation or finally found to be guilty, so convicted criminals might be a group to be administered about experimental design, about radicism and kind of concept. The public officers and the bureaucrats need to have some basic awareness about analysis of statistics and relevant information gathered through the scope of works pursuant to their responsibility and so forth. And also, I like to introduce some what called a system and policy about the automation programs. What is CCAP? And the contemporary paradigm of governance might be on electronic basis. So you may know notably e-governance. What is e-governance? And as I've illustrated in the last case about the state licensing system, what a driver's license and a professional license, they now developed kind of a automatic scheme about a point system or others. And the public lives for the American citizen, perhaps not irrelevant with Korean public also, could highly increase the ease and convenience we now in the scope of its benefit. CCAP is responsible for supporting the IT needs of the entire Wisconsin cost system. CCAP's mission is to small, how to be eligible, maintain related necessary and data with a appropriate uniformity, provide the Wisconsin cost system with ready access to data, number, support, and explore hardware and software necessary to store, secure, and manage data, provide with public access to the Wisconsin cost system, and promote high level of confidence and satisfaction in the Wisconsin cost system. CCAP was created by merging the cost system computer departments, the circuit code automation program, and the Office of Information Technology Service. In July 2001, the merger unite code technology system to allow the more efficient, coded effective rule of resources. The circuit code automation program, started in 1967, was one of the state's earliest and, as measured by its units, the most successful efforts to provide blah, 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 blah. So now the online reservoir is extensive, as you know. In order to the public increase perhaps a public access in one aspect, and might the concept might be a sharing of information, as we and also convenience I have illustrated, and many reasons, but also limitations and the kind of a values and exceptions to be detected. For example, what we have learned a 4-year, and it includes the scope of exemptions, as you see, and we considered case relevant. For example, the request of information, public information now was stored and managed by government, by a Reporters Committee for Freedom of Press, and one case would be there later in this class about this context. Actually, the government is a powerful unit about the public information. You may know the Life of Congress in the United States, which now is pompous about its volume and the scope of storage, about types of books and articles. So quite exquisite and comprehensive. You will see about its title and types and such. So and in public concern, they have centralized kind of a elaboration about the public information. So the press, for example, is a stakeholder about that context, the disclosure of public information, the extent of its requirement, and any limitations. For the private information might be excluded in due concern, as you expect, and also personal affairs, which is must be kept confidential to serve the end of a government. And researchers, as you will be excited about dealings in the second session of this class about the scientist also highly depends on the information and data managed by government. And the CCAP has been exploited by one scientist about the studies of a domestic violence, a recidivation among spousal abusers. So we consider, in the context of science-based information, the effectiveness of SAFE program and RNR, for example. The government now operate a scope of programs to actually educate and reform the dangerous propensity of perpetrators. We may define in more strict terms and legal understanding, for example, offenders or reoffenders. Generally, the scientists use perpetrators. So they like to investigate the efficacy of a public program, a SAFE or RNI, about a deterrence or prevention against the recurrence of same crimes, a recidivation, and any repeated perpetration. So how much it is efficient and effective, and which certainly a benefit from the public programs. So the public agencies often are in a wider spectrum about decision making. So we have considered, for example, legislative rulemaking and adjudicative rulemaking, and the court policies to intervene in the check and balance schemes, a separation of power principle, oversight might be one responsibility we now derive from the constitutional structure and authority, you see, and therefore they would fall on the structure and authority, and that is one concern we have focused in this term. And as you identify in the printouts delivered in the Friday class, we have a good visual understanding from Appendix A, the informality and formality continuum in administrative role, and in the extreme and on the parameter you find the informal decisions made without significant legal rules governing the process, and at the other extreme you find the formal decisions, and in the mid-terrain we have phases of a different level between the informality and formality. In context of decision making, adjudication may well fall within that gamut you consider on the parameter. So due process adjudication, for example, where no Goldberg ingredients are required, rare, but Ingraham comes close. What is B in this implication? increasing due process formality and Goldberg. So you may position selective scope of cases which pertains to this gamut. Horowitz, gas, and many licensing and personal cases, and all 10 Goldberg ingredients will be applied to this span. You consider full adjudicatory formality in the Federal and State Administrative Procedure Acts. And also, you will consider the rulemaking about this instruction. Classical rulemaking and biometric might fall within the first left column, and in the second extreme, negotiate rulemaking may fall. Rulemaking under Section 561 Federal Administrative Procedure Act, and notice and command rulemaking under Section 553 will pertain to the third class, Federal Administrative Procedure Act. And hybrid FTC rulemaking under Maxson versus Moore statute must be placed in fifth in column, and judicially applied due process standards in rulemaking that resemble adjudication in substance, consider a Sangamon value case about FTC licensing and the kind of distribution of values about the business operations. And what is seventh, full adjudicative formality when statute requires hearing on the record in federal rulemaking. So under the rigid structure about a constitutional requirement, we may generate kind of a formality continuum in administrative law, and you may exercise matchup about relevance and any, in your view about extent, leniency and latitude the agencies would entertain without violation of core rules and constitutional or statutory authorities. So, in my scheme, you will find a hybrid nature of circumstances the public agencies would often face with. So, they may buy some science product or others. They may exploit in-house research officers, or may hire outside experts. We reviewed in the last class about the public programs, contracts, big contracts perhaps, and any project which requires expenses and time over a project period of time. So the science support is quite essential to survive for success. So they would tend to implement program evaluation initiative. They would assess the efficacy of public program about those of a standing status, and which might be in a plan stage, is about exploration and kind of. So they would exploit the research force to convince the effectiveness of program. So you will perhaps, for example, what a one-shot case study, pre-experimental design to address the public, the need of public agencies when they engaged in the kind of a stakeholders' interest. They should be responsible for Congress, for example. You will know the head start about public education, which was programmed by Jones administration during 1960s. And we have considered some slim aspect about the initiative on public education in the United States, since federalism operates to divide the authority between a state and a federal government. And that is quite challenging to make any significant alterations or reforms about public education. So the effort would often be focused on a disadvantaged group of students, for example, and Head Start and the piecemeal responses from the successive government actually was a critical concern of American public in that time. So they quite excited to measure the efficacy of a Head Start for various reasons, as you surmise. And the research was performed to be based on pre-experimental design. Then how do you understand the intelligence characteristics of a Anglo-Saxon countries? You might know the ways of approach in basics, between the inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning. So we may eventually converge to the kind of a final truth we share, but the basic propensity would be discerned in that context. So the public agents or officers, perhaps high-rank bureaucrats might be interested in empirical data and the kind of any more significant comparison based on statistical analysis. Or so the experimental design or quasi-experimental design would be preferred in the first priority. In that case, the one-shot case study or the pre-experimental design would largely disappoint the concerned people. So that is one point. We now be pressured in the governmental scope of governmental agencies, I suppose. So they are keenly related with the research teams, for example. There would well be a hybrid nature of a bureaucracy, a public agency. They may not be a research experts, for example, and they would breed careers in sure terms of administration. They would be educated in law school, and they learn from the legal subject and case laws, and might be scanty of experience about the statistics waters. And so the bureaucratic sociology might well expose a quite interesting composition. So we are excited actually about that. In any case, we need to some have a basic knowledge about the research and their work, attribute of their work. So typically, this social sciences will not be less amenable to the kind of a pure experimental design, controlled experiment analysis, pre-test, and a post-test might produce quite a good determinative contrast between independent and dependent variables. That is not the case oftentimes in social science. So often the dependent variables may not be manipulated by researchers, which would be administered a pre-test, and the kind of a control group might intervene to induce any causal relations. So causal inference would be point of a interest that the top ranks of agents would be focused. So they will be expected to prefer the practical effect they were framed to administer to serve the public goodness or the research work what provides a good basic point of a understanding about the nature and character of a for example, what is that? A National Board of Medical Examiners would not be able to frame the recruitment of a medical student, for example. So they may outsource the kind of a research work to illuminate any meaningful consequence between both sexes. So our female applicants would be competent as same as the other sex, male applicants. In that context, the research product generated in the long term time series might work to provide a basic information needed for the policymakers in the National Board of Medical Examiners. So the female person might be vulnerable in competence and capabilities about chemistry subject, for example, and any biological or science subject. And also you will occasionally experience the kind of a research work about the LSAT performance between different races, set scores among the variables, independent variables across races, ethnicities, a gender. So that would provide useful information that the key policy decision making has been performed adequately to be responsible with challenges and any they increase the social justice. The Michigan panel study of income dynamics would be longitudinal study about between the economic status, perhaps a lower income class and more privileged, wealthier class in the community, and what motivates their behavior, patterns of consumption, for example, how to interact with the members of community. So is that determinative about income disparity, or is trend? So perhaps monitored and they manage it in the project period of time, 20 years, 13 years, and panel mode would be employed to disclose a more pertinent relationship. Perhaps in some cases a social economical perspective quite in hybrid, and in some cases economic factor would be most governing, but in another period of time social attitude would intervene in gross extent than previous times about the typical dynamics to interact with community. And in this case, the panel method would be employed. Nonetheless, we have some precaution about what a bias, a maturation might occur in the members of panel. They move to other states, and they might be complacent and they're tedious about studies. So impose difficulties and a perplexion on the research centers or others. And also the public policymakers and chief administrators may prefer to chase the policy effect. So the state of Connecticut were long agonized about speeding violations. So it, of course, is highly prone to produce fatalities, larger fatalities in the traffic accident. So the policy focus was to crack down the speeding violations. So it the strategy was intensified in the year, for example, 1953. And we may be interested in the policy effect about that focused years. So they would introduce time series evaluation about this effect, and also they would insert the control state to infer any meaningful implications about the study. So this is a final class, so this course would be rather discussory. So I'd like to lead you to the mood of reflections about previous classes, and also we will conduct some make-up review of missing cases. So actually, you will be instructed about the ideology of this discipline. So you may find ultimately the kind of a Platonic concept of justice. What is justice? And you also the kind of human solidarity is an ultimate destination. Often the leadership would reach. Well, we generally see the social justice, distributive justice. So in Platonic concept, you will be exposed to 4 types of communal members. Right? Some class would be quite ignorant about the community issues and others. They have no intent to involve in the public issues. Perhaps this that will, of course, differ from the contemporary notion, for example, distrust of politics or any intelligent solitude from the secular community. For example, I just don't mention about and don't concern. That is a moral generated in very controversial case, homosexuality in the air base. So it was condemned about. So you have introduced in previous case about its implications. The context would differ, perhaps. So it is philosophical and very, perhaps a discussion of human strengths and elements. So that class would be often viewed as actually minimal in the context of a Platonic impression in his argument. And what is the second class, for example? Conscient. So the second class is very expositive about the public issues and communal concerns about justice or good neighborship and ideas about expectations and citizen type of livings, decent livings. So some rules and compromise were embraced in their minds. Nonetheless, their intelligence would not be practiced. It might not come into reality. There would be idealistic class of intelligence in our classification, but still lack the capacity to meet the leadership. The Platonic implored the importance of courage and action against the injustice or any. And we may not undertake the kind of a difficult question, which it would be philosophical. Perhaps might be expedited by illustration of several figures. For example, Bentham, who is a John Stuart Mill, and a profound thinkers about the distributive justice, John Rawls. You'll know the big names about the ideology. So how to the ideology for aspects of concern would perhaps transcend the contemporary division between communism or liberal democracy, liberalism. So the Platonic idea has been concerned dominantly about the talent or is a competence. Talent and the basic capabilities from personal strength. So the ideal community might be located certainly in the sphere where the individual citizen could exercise their talent and capability at its most extent. So how to actually enliven and perhaps procure a due environments for the individual success. That success might be defined in different ways. Nonetheless, he actually focused on the innate nature of a person in terms of his talent and capabilities. He should not be abridged unduly from external circumstances. And also, they need to be satisfied fully given his work would be completed in, as I stated, talent might be related with the extent of talents or capabilities. Therefore, the social concept of a justice or others may be related essentially with rather communal perspectives. Consider which is originated first would be dubious in this presumption between individual and community. And social justice might get prone to slant on the community or society. And also, many important moderations from the extreme version of this. The distributed justice from jurors who be actually influential. You consider now followed by in paradigm and principle by many advanced states, and also we cherish that value. For example, what is a veiled ignorance from its concept? What is first principle? So that would provide a basis for international cooperation. It's any hospitality between developed and underdeveloped countries, for example. So justice is central and come as a priority to remedy the extremities of liberal state. And we also trace back the ideas of John Stuart Mill. So actually the concept of liberty or liberal democracy is not a laissez-faire economy or other abandonment to favor individuals at its extreme. So we consider some decent interaction between individual and community. What is a hedonic pleasure and what is a applied concept about personal pleasure. So the idea what actually ignites the concept of public agency. So how much is freed from pressure or public pressure? they might find the adequate pleasure as an agency, for example. So they must know the context of community and the dynamism between the government, community, and individual. And also, for example, the modern thinker, you know the name Sen, for example, who is Nobelist of a Nobelist for the economic recently, for example, urged the importance of a social justice, entailing the individual consequence about capabilities or talent. So what is his frame is not based on any pure theory from classic economists, group of classic economists. His focus was to make a kind of idealistic condition about individual talent or capabilities. So fairly be seen approximating with the Platonic ideals. So the ideology would be a first condition if you are employed as public officer to deal with your challenges or agendas assigned by your line of authority. And you will also need to know the working theories, for example, what is a rational choice theory. So, we have been exposed to kind of a formality continuum. So they have wide latitude, which would be safe from oversight from court authority orders. It often would not be brought into courtroom by litigation orders. So you need to have an extent of awareness about rationale and the kind of a basic paradigm about choice. And also you will know the kind of institutional working theories, for example, the concept developed by Webb about the modern bureaucracies, and what is a moral strength to attribute the public agency, and what is the role and responsibility to sustain the capitalist mode of production across the jurisdictions. And also you have learned the bureau dominance theory, for example, in contrast with the parent agency paradigm. So you will have some reflections about the carriage of your public responsibility in due time, and meditation about your identity and status, what should be guided by these series and principles. And I have stated kind of principles now urge it to be responsive with the changing circumstances, transparency, for example, and simplicity, kind of, to reduce the ill consequence from desultory cases of rulemaking, or and also many important points about the course of conduct or action between adjudicative and list rulemaking, and how to organize the important implementation team. So you will sometimes be driven to conduct a reality check, for example, how much changes could be achieved to serve the public needs, for example. And also you will be a normative deliberator about structure and authority, which includes the Constitution, basically, and the general statute about most representatively, the Federal Administrative Procedure Act in 1947, and also the federalism now have been practiced in the United States, and the constitutional structure will vary across jurisdictions. You will need the national constitution in any first priority, since it incorporates the basic values and dispositions of nation about important public agenda. How do they act? For example, your exposure to constitutional theory or knowledge will lead to a productive enactment and a safe enactment in some cases. The freedom of a press and the First Amendment right is quite consequential about your rulemaking. So you'll know, for example, content neutral and a dichotomy between different dealings involving the conditions and circumstances. So the manner, time, and place restriction would be a rule, constructed and now formally held by court authorities. So in the class of a content-neutral regulations, you will be less regulated and perhaps enjoy more latitude in the least compliance with the time, place, and manner restrictions. In other class or content-based regulation, the court would apply a strict scrutiny, so often could not be survived to restrict the freedom of expression. So actually the organic statute and a basic comprehensive act such as Federal Administrative Procedure Act must be respected in generality. And you also have some specific statutes which is pertinent to your field of expertise and practice. And also, because of federalism, we have a other modality, titled Uniform Role Commissioners, Model State Administrative Procedure Act, enacted in 1981. The gist of a provision would be briefed in the second session of this class to finalize this term. Also, I may make some point from the cases not dealt in the previous class. So we know the court holdings and its implications from Board of Curators versus University of Missouri and versus Horowitz. And what are Cinderella Korea? I have searched for internet sources about its main holdings or brief facts or others. United States Department of Justice versus Reporters Committee of Freedom of Press, and Universal Camera Corp versus NNRB and others. And also, I like to make a point about student rights. So students are an important class in the contemporary community, and the student movement is quite expositive. You can see in major community, EU and United States, and Korea also now have many reforms and new perspectives about the Bill of Rights and others. And you have witnessed the success of allegedly leftist educators in principal charge of public education in South Korea. And the progressive reform seems to be expedited in that concern. So that is some issue to be visited briefly about in the second session of this class. Okay, so that will be all for the first session of this class. After a short break, we'll complete the rest of the work. Okay? Thank you for your attention. See you soon.